Hey folks, got a question for you. Do you satisfy yourself after you do something? Maybe you set a goal and you accomplish it and then you treat yourself to something. Maybe you treat yourself to something big. Or do you wait a little bit, like delayed gratification, in order to get something even larger and more meaningful? Well, ask yourself that, because that's what we're going to talk about today with Dr. Emilio Justo. So sit back, enjoy, listen, watch, and remember, have your pets spayed or neutered. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Amazing People, Amazing Things with your host, Chuck.
You kind of piqued my curiosity with your book. What is this concept of delayed gratification?
Well, first, Chuck, if you don't mind, I need to take you back as to how this all started, right? And I'm not sure if you're aware of my history, but basically, my parents and I are Cuban refugees, and so coming to the United States at a young age, we didn't have a whole lot financially, and the thing that I had a lot of is love. I had a lot of love and nurturing, and my parents have been my biggest blessing in life. When I look back, I noticed that really my success throughout my life has been based on the so-called Cuban triad that I refer to in my book and in my talks, and that's based on number 1, self-discipline, number 2, resilience, and number 3, delayed gratification. And the delayed gratification is basically, in my view, it's resisting the temptation for an immediate reward in favor of a later, often greater reward. And so throughout my life, and later as we get into this, I'm happy to share an embarrassing story that I share in the book and I share openly with others, because I'm not perfect and I've made huge mistakes in my life and probably continue to do so. The whole delayed gratification is something that I've practiced for the most part throughout my life, and putting off those immediate pleasures in favor of searching for that bigger gift down the road. And I've tried to teach that. My wife and I have tried to teach that to our 3 teenagers. It's been a struggle, because teenagers in today's society, as you know, with the instant gratification culture, are focused on the here and now, and they want it now. They want to have a bite to eat. Well, they order it online and get it in a few minutes through, DoorDash or Grubhub or what have you. And so it's all about instant gratification. But I really, really, in my core, I believe that if you can delay gratification, that in the long run, you will achieve so much greater success than you can ever imagine. And I feel that in my core. No one can tell me otherwise, because I've lived it. I've lived it throughout my many years on this earth.
So that delayed gratification that you're talking about, is that the simplest way I could think about it and say it is that stopping yourself from having that party and saying, yay, celebration, I accomplished it. Is it that, or is it something different?
No, I think it's a little different than that. It's not quite that simplistic. Delayed gratification by no means implies that you can't have fun and that you can't enjoy the moment. That's not what it means. That's an oversimplification. I think what it means is that as we have decisions in our life and as we try to achieve certain things, that sometimes we just have to pause. I mean, we have to pause and balance things. And so what is more important? Is it more important to really pause and look down the road at what we could have, whether it be in 1 month, whether it be in 1 year, whether it be in 10 years, versus just acting on a whim now because, it feels good or it looks good, or, what's a good example? So this is an example that has not settled well with our oldest son, but, he's really into cars, right? And he knows everything about any car, especially the highfalutin cars and the muscle cars and I mean everything. And he believes that at his age, he just turned 20, and he believes that he should have a nice car, a nice muscle car. But I'm trying to explain that, look, you're only 20. You have your whole life ahead of you. And rather than trying to spend money on a car, which to him is his image, is save that money. Perhaps invest it. Or if you're going to spend it on something more productive that'll bring you more value in the long term than simply a car. A car is not going to really get you anything. It's going to devalue very, very quickly, and it's not going to really bring you anything other than instant gratification. And it's just going to bring you a self of ego, maybe amongst your friends. But really, is that what life is about? Is ego amongst your friends? No. You should really look towards your future and pause and think about it. Don't make rash decisions. But unfortunately, he and I tend to butt heads on that subject. So I haven't quite convinced him, even though he tells me he believes in delayed gratification. And I think he's sincere in what he says, but I don't honestly see it in his actions.
The want outweigh that postponed gratification of thinking about what could I get more if I postpone and think about things. I think you made a really good example by using it with the car and saying that, a lot of times people want that instant gratification. And now I understand what you mean by that. It's just like, oh, I have to have that fastest or that best looking or those pair of shoes right now.
Right.
Because it's going to satisfy me, gratify me, give me that satisfaction now. But what good is it going to do tomorrow, the next day? Now I got a pair of sneakers.
Right. We have to look at our life overall, and using the same example, if one would just use those funds and maybe invest in something simple. I'm not an investment guru, but I've learned over the years that just a simple investment like an index fund following the stock market, following the S&P 500, you use the power of compound interest, right? Which yes. I did not really learn early in my life. Being an immigrant with my parents who didn't have anything, they really, as much as they loved me, they didn't really teach me those concepts. And so I've learned that power perhaps a little too late in my life. But for our children, I'm trying to teach them that, look, don't blow your hard-earned money. Our oldest son, he works like a dog when he's home from college. He works and works and works and makes a buck, at a restaurant. But why blow that money? Use that money wisely. Invest. Use the power of compound interest. It'll bring you so much more down the road. As a young person, drive a crappy car. That's okay. Lots of cool people drive crappy cars. You don't have to drive a fancy, muscle car, $50,000 car. Save. When you're going to be having an apartment, for example, in college, have some roommates, which he does, and divide up that rent. Don't have a fancy apartment, just on your own and paying all this rent. That's just money down the drain.
Yeah.
You have to always think about your future and what's best for you in the long run. And it's a difficult thing, when you're young, you just want it all right now. And you think it's too long to wait. It's too long to wait, let alone 1 year, but let alone think about 5, 10, 20, 40 years down the road, right? They can't envision that. That's just not within their capability of envisioning that for most people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad that we're talking about the finance and the future and things like that, and that word compounded interest. That I'm like you. I'm in that same camp. I did not learn about it until far too late in my life. And if that was something that was taught in school at a relatively young age, things would be so much better. And like I said, this is one area where you should put off that gratification of buying it now, because you're going to pay for it. I mean, you're going to pay for it in the future if you don't start saving and looking towards that the future.
Right. And Chuck, you bring up a great point in that you mentioned just a moment ago that we don't learn about it in school. And that's the thing I do not understand is our schools, they teach all these great subjects and they're all important, math, science, history, English. I get it. But they don't teach any practical aspects of life. Teaching about basic savings, investments, just life skills. I mean, there should be a course. And if I had the time, and maybe someday I will, I would put together a curriculum on life skills that could be taught to high school kids to just teach them basic concepts. They don't have to be experts, but basic concepts. So I was reading an article, and I may be slightly off on these numbers, but I think I'm fairly close. So if you extrapolate it, as a youth, if you save up, and I know this is a large sum of money, but if you save up, let's say $50,000, and you're 20 or 25, that's a lot of money, but let's just use that as an example. So you saved up $50,000. You invested in an index fund following the S&P 500. And you look back historically at the last 50 years, and the S&P 500 has averaged, on average, about 10% a year over that period of time. So you extrapolate and you take that 50,000, 40 years later, so now you're 60, 65, and of course, God willing that you're living, right? I mean, we're making certain basic assumptions. But you're now 60 or 65, 40 years later. That $50,000, when you work the numbers out, take a guess. How much do you think that turns into? Just take a wild guess.
I'm going to have to do a spread of 980,000 to 1.2 million.
$8 million. $8 million. Right? So I mean, think about it. That's just... Yeah. And that doesn't even, it doesn't include, of course, the cost of that's just the numbers. I mean, obviously there's inflation and other factors that go into it. But nonetheless, the power of compound interest is so incredible and so exponential. But it only works long term. It doesn't work short term, right? You can't do it for 5 years and say, I'm going to become rich. No, it's got to be long term.
You know what I would end up doing? I'd say, all right, Pops, can you give me the $50,000 and put in the bank, and I'll pay you back $50,000 in 30 years. but like you said, 50,000 to not just teenagers or young people, to everybody is a lot of money. It's a big chunk. So I think we could probably even scale it back and say, say you're just that 20-year-old starting to work, you've got your you're going to college or whatnot, maybe do dollar cost averaging type of thing.
Sure.
If people don't know what that is, they could find out. But basically, some places don't allow you to do every day, but a weekly or monthly. But put $50 a week or $100 a month, but consistently do that. And over that 30-year period, like you said, compounded interest, or not even the compounded interest, if you have the right stocks that pay dividend, all that stuff just adds up.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's a perfect point that I also preach to our children, and I talk about in the book when it talks about the savings part of it, is that, again, our oldest son, who works when he's home for breaks, I've asked him, and he's done it, that you've got to, at a bare minimum, in my opinion, take at least 10% of your paycheck. Ideally, I would say 15%. And if you're super aggressive, maybe 20%, but at least 10%. And right off the top, before you even see that paycheck, before you see that net pay, that 10% goes right off the top every pay period and goes straight into some savings vehicle. Whether it's just a savings account or whether you put it into, like I say, an index fund, whether you put it into an IRA or a Roth IRA. I mean, anything to save and let that compound interest work its magic. And that's something that our son has been very good at doing because he just doesn't see it. So he doesn't think about it, right? If you're going to wait to get the paycheck and then have to write out another check and say, okay, I'm going to deposit it into a savings account, it'll never work. It'll happen once or twice, and then you'll never keep that going.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, because I do recall my father telling me, pay yourself first 10%. But my excuse was, I don't make enough to pay myself, so I'm going to spend it now on what I want, which was a
Right.
huge mistake. Like I said, you get used to it. 10% is not much. 20
Right.
would be nice to say, but 10%, come on.
Right.
Don't buy that can of soda. Don't buy that 6-pack of beer, or your
Right.
coffee.
Oh my gosh, isn't that terrible? I mean, coffee, the amount of money we waste on coffee drinks, it's just unbelievable. But
It
that's
is.
it's part of the instant gratification culture again.
It is, right. And I think something, I mean, you are hit on TEDx, right? But TEDx, TED Talks, but I think you may have mentioned this there about mistakes, and talking about mistakes. We learn from our mistakes.
Correct.
That's another big thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? How is it that realizing our mistakes can help us?
Absolutely. I'm a huge believer in making mistakes, embracing failure, and learning from our failures. And so when we have a so-called setback, we have to change our paradigm and look at it as a temporary step back. But then we have to not only bounce back, we have to bounce forward. And to bounce forward, my mantra is that progression requires obsession, which was my second TEDx talk, by the way. So I started with the first TEDx talk, which just to give you a little history behind this, I started with my first TEDx talk, and it was basically, I wanted to give it truly as a legacy to our children. That's really what motivated me, because as I get a little bit older in life, and I see the mortality of my being, right? I'm just in my early 60s, and I've lived just a tremendous, blessed life. I'm still practicing medicine, eye surgery full time, 50 hours a week, and I enjoy every minute of it. But at this stage in my life, I'm looking at the big picture, and I'm looking down the road. What can I leave as a legacy to my children, and maybe someday grandchildren, and ultimately to the world at large? So I wrote the first TEDx talk, which is Delayed Gratification, Your Superpower to Success, which was released around, I think, September of 2023. It now, amazingly enough, I don't know how these things occur, but amazingly enough, it has over 6 million views. And so as a result of the popularity of that TEDx talk, I decided to expound upon it and then write the book, which is The Power of Pause, Mastering Delayed Gratification for Success, where I got into some of these nuances that we're talking about now, cultivating resilience, creating structured plans, achieving, celebrating small wins in terms of milestones, tracking your progress, et cetera, making go on and on. And so I wrote the book, and that's done very well. But right as I'm writing the book, at the tail end, I'm also simultaneously writing my second TEDx talk, which is called Unleashing the Drive Within, the Obsession Advantage to Unprecedented Success. And that's where I talk about obsession, changing the paradigm of the negative connotation of obsession that we think of as an unhealthy fixation on something, but rather changing it to a positive connotation, whereby obsession really means that we're focused and passionate about a specific goal. Nothing's going to stop us. Again, those setbacks, like we mentioned earlier, aren't setbacks. They're just merely temporary steps back, and that we're going to push forward. And that talk has only been out on YouTube just a little over 2 months, and it already has over 1 million views, which again just blows me away. So that's kind of been what I've been up to. I'm trying to just get out there, and selfishly, I'm trying to preach this to our children, and they're kind of half paying attention. I think my wife is the one who actually pays the most attention, and she's the one who's my support and gives me compliments. And the kids, again, they're in their own little world of instant gratification and friends and socializing and things like that. But But one day when I'm long gone, hopefully someone will look back at that and think, gosh, he did try to shine a small light on this world and try to pass along an important message.
I'm going to say that you have already done that, so that's fantastic. And if you don't mind, if I add one thing to this, and it's a little bit off track or off topic, is the fact that you might. I'll use me as an example. So we're in the same age bracket, age category. You can't look at somebody else and compare yourself, meaning, oh, that person's a doctor, and I can't get there, so I'm going to, I think sometimes that immediate gratifications satisfies you because you can't see the future of something, or you can't obtain what that other person has. So what I'm trying to say is, don't compare yourself, but you can always look to that person as an example to strive for, to be better. Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense. It makes and I can use the analogy. It's similar, slightly different, but for example, in my medical practice, my ophthalmology practice, which I just started just last week, I started my 36th year of practice. But throughout my career, a lot of people would ask me, perhaps fellow ophthalmologists, hey, you have these big-time competitors down the street from you. What do you think about that? Does that worry you, intimidate you, what have you? And I've always felt like, hey, the more competition, the better. To me, it's not a competition. To me, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to provide the best service to our patients, which I think I've done. I mean, I've tried to treat our patients as an extended part of my family. And ultimately, the results will shine themselves. And ultimately, we can all be successful. It's not a zero-sum game. It is, in life, it is not a zero-sum game. So we each one of us can achieve the utmost in our life. And it doesn't mean that by me achieving the utmost that somehow I'm taking it away from someone else. I think we can all do that. So yeah, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's the other thing too is I want folks who are the audience out there to know that we're not just talking about people in their 50s, 60s, and we're not just talking about people in their 20s or 30s. This really can go for anyone at any point in time. But it sounds like right now, we're kind of focused on your eldest son. I think you said he's about 20 years old, going to college, and we're talking about compounded interest over 10, 20, 30 years. So people might be going, well, I'm already 50. I don't know if I'm going to be able to save for such a long time. But what I'm getting at is, if you haven't started, if you haven't done any of this, start today. It's never too late. That's one.
Correct.
And I think the second thing too is that, your power of pause, mastering delayed gratification for success, that again can be at any point in time in our life. Just don't delay. Don't delay doing this, but delay that gratification. And you see the outcome is much, much better than having it all right now.
I firmly believe that, Chuck. I really do. And just a quick disclaimer, I just want to make sure as we're talking about our 20-year-old son, I mean, I want to put it out there to your audience. I mean, I adore him. Sometimes I know he feels that I'm very hard on him. I love him, and I would take a bullet for him. We do butt heads on certain philosophical principles, and I think it's just the age gap, and that I consider myself a little bit wiser, having lived all this time, and he's younger, and I get the young mentality. I understand. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to stop trying to preach my principles. And as my wife tells me, she always semi-criticizes me and she's absolutely 100% correct, that kids, youth, don't want to be talked to or preached to or sermonized to. I get it. But that's kind of the way I am. I don't know, my personality is such that I feel like I'm a teacher. And just like I teach medical students in my practice, I teach patients in my practice, but I also want to teach the youth, and I want to teach our own children. going back, if I could, a quick moment, a simple example of delayed gratification. So just hear me out ever so quickly. So I went to the University of Michigan, right? So for those in the audience who know the Michigan Wolverines, one of the elite blue blood programs in college football. So I'm at the University of Michigan, and as most students there do, I purchase a 6-pack of season football tickets each year. And at the time, this is way back in the day, a 6-pack, which would be 6 home games, would be $36 for end zone tickets, which would be the student section. So I would buy those. Now, in my 6 years of college and medical school at Michigan, I think I attended one football game. Why? Because what I purposely did was I would scalp each ticket that I bought for $6, right? $36, 6 tickets, that's $6 a ticket. I would scalp a $6 ticket and I would sell it for $50. So I would make $44 in profit, which back then, this is in the early 80s, back then, that's a lot of money, my man. And
yes.
And then, I could use that money for something more important. Maybe having a pizza night on the weekend when I got tired of dorm food, or maybe saving up some money so that when I had, let's say I remember the Beach Boys come in town for a concert, that I could go to a concert, right? So that was kind of the power. A small example, I know it sounds so ridiculous, but it's a small example of that delayed gratification, because I could have easily just gone to all the games and that would be that. But I didn't have any money in college. All I had was student loans. So, I didn't have the money. I had to use it and be judicious as to how I use the money.
Those are great examples, because it's further making me understand what you mean by that delayed gratification. And it's not like I assumed at the very beginning when I said, oh, does that mean that I do something and then I can't celebrate? No, it's not that.
No,
So
you celebrate
examples-
every little small win, every milestone that you achieve. You celebrate it. Absolutely, you celebrate it. But the irony to that story is that now, fast forward, as now that I'm wiser and more of an adult, and I have the financial means, for the last 10, 15 years, I take my entire family to Ann Arbor. I'm based in Phoenix. I take them to Ann Arbor twice a year for a football game, and we sit right at the 50-yard line. So, right, so it's a little bit of a delayed gratification from college all the way to now, but it just kind of drills home the point that sometimes waiting can be worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to add something too about the conversation. You said that about, you and your son and things like that, and you adore him, you love him. I want to say I have no kids, but it's just that father-son dynamic. And I think that's something that people understand across the board. Again, my dad, he said, pay yourself, do this, do that. I was like, I don't make enough, I can't do that. It's not that they might be being tough on you, they're being realistic. And we as the son, as the younger, it's just like I'm not going to do it your way, I'm going to do it my way kind of attitude. And then we get older, and what do? We do the same thing our fathers are doing to us, because with your age, like you said, you become wiser and you know better. Maybe that's not for 100%, but that's a many.
I fully agree. And I distinctly remember my parents, and my father in particular, who tended to be the person who ran the finances at home for the most part. He would always preach about not overspending and spending money that you didn't have. So again, being immigrants, my parents only spent what they had. They bought really 99% of things with cash. They weren't doing it based on credit cards. I'm sure they did have a credit card, but that's not what they used. They basically did it with cash. Nowadays, in my own life, right? Of course, I do the opposite in the sense that I use credit cards for everything. Why? Because I want the cash back or the points, etc. But I make sure that every month I pay that credit card in full, right? And so that's another part of the whole savings dynamic is that we want to, make sure that we don't overspend and that we're judicious with our spending, so that we can not put ourselves in a hole, which is the worst thing you can do, especially early in your life, is put yourself in that hole where you have huge debt. I think, coming up with a debt repayment plan, if you're a young person, you have student loans, go ahead and start paying those student loans. Again, just because let's say you have your first job and you're earning this money and you want to blow it on nice things. No, don't. I mean, get something nice to give you some of that instant gratification. Okay, a little instant gratification is okay, but take some of that money and pay down your debt, pay down your student loans. Make sure you pay off your credit cards. It is such a blessing in life if one can live fairly debt-free. I mean, there's always going to be some debt, right? You may have a home mortgage, you may have a car payment, which hopefully isn't too large of a car payment, but for the most part, if you can minimize debt, I think that's a great thing. I know that there's a lot of financial people that talk about so-called good debt, and that gets in a more complex conversation, but it's a great feeling to really have little to no debt. It really is.
I agree with you 100% on that. And I am no financial expert or anything like that, but I knew, can't say early on in my life, but later on in my life, after having a mortgage and all that the career path that I was on was not going to give me a pension, was not going to give me great sum of money. I'm going to use this. I'm not a doctor or anything like that. So what I'm getting at is I knew early on that my responsibility was, if I have a mortgage, I need to take care of that first. It's my largest debt. Get rid of that if possible as soon as I can, or like I said, live as close to being debt-free as possible, because that affords you to do those other things that you may want to have that semi-instant gratification, meaning if you don't praise yourself, this is my thought, if you don't praise yourself every once in a while, pretty soon you're going to be down. People feel depressed because there's no pat on the back, and it could be as inexpensive in some cases, a concert, but some cases it's not inexpensive. But
Right.
It could be something like that. It's treat yourself every once in a while to make yourself happy, and then get back on that track again.
Absolutely. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, my whole point here is not to sacrifice your life and be a martyr for someday 30, 40 years later. That's not what it's about. It's just about making judicious decisions where you delay certain aspects of that gratification, but you're certainly going to experience certain instant gratifications, and you're going to enjoy those. I mean, definitely enjoy them and digest them and exalt over them. Absolutely. But you have to be judicious, and you always have to look at the greater long-term reward.
Yeah, and part of that long-term reward, and if you want to reward yourself, spoil yourself with the trip, especially out of the country or just out of your own zone, just to see what other cultures are like.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. That
is an important one. Dr. Justo, can you let us know where can people go to find your book, to hear more about you, to watch and listen to your TEDx talks and things like that?
Well, Chuck, there's several ways. They can certainly go to, I have a personal website separate from my practice website, and the personal website is dremiliojusto.com, and that's spelled DREMILIOJUSTO.com. And there are links to pretty much everything. There's links to the TEDx talks. There's links to Amazon for the book. The book is actually available not only in Amazon, it is the #1 Amazon bestseller, but also it's available at Barnes & Noble and any of the major retailers out there. I also, as we were speaking, I think offline earlier, I also did my own narration for the book. So I have an audiobook that's available on Audible for those individuals out there that like audiobooks, which I've become quite enthused with audiobooks over the last 3 or 4 years. That's another one of my silly mistakes, that I didn't get into that until a later part of my life, and I wasted a lot of time driving to work 1 hour one way and just listening to the radio, where I could have been really expanding my mind and learning about so many new things. So the power of pause, mastering delayed gratification for success. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Audible, you name it. Please go to my website. You can contact me directly on the contact page of the website. It'll go directly to me. You will be assured to get a personalized response from me, as I always respond to everyone personally and quite timely.
Thanks for that info, because it is important. I do have your website up, and there's a lot of good motivational information and motivational video clips and things like that on there. And I think that many of us need to be motivated, need to be reminded of whatever goal that is that you have, whatever outcome that you want. And it is important, I think, to see others attain and to share what they've accomplished and how they got there, kind of like a roadmap. So.
Absolutely. And when one looks at others, whether you're looking at mine and I look at other roadmaps out there, I think the key message for your audience is don't let it overwhelm you. Don't let it work the reverse and somehow drag you down or say, oh, gee, I'm never going to be like this person. No, just use it as a roadmap. Use it as inspiration. Don't use it as something that's going to psychologically drag you down. No, I mean, again, it's not a competition. It's not that my roadmap is better than your roadmap, Chuck, or better than any other person's roadmap. It just happens to be my roadmap. I just happen to follow it. I've been blessed by it. I'm grateful for it, right? Gratitude, humility, two big things that I talk about, which, again, I believe to my core. But we each have our own destiny in this life, right? And
Yes.
that's okay. That's okay. We don't all have to mirror someone else. We don't have to look at that Instagram following that we're following some celebrity and we think that they're the cat's meow and the best thing out there and we have to be like them. No, create your own path, blaze your own trail, and just try to stay motivated. It's natural and it's human nature that we're going to have times in our life when we feel a little down. Okay? I mean, I would be lying to you, Chuck, if I told you that every moment in my life has been so positive and I always feel upbeat and nothing ever brings me down. That's a bunch of baloney, right? We all have those down moments. The key is, can one overcome them, and can one take a step back, internalize what you may be going through at that moment, and then figure out a way to be resilient and bounce forward. And again, be obsessed. Be obsessed. You got to be obsessed. It's not a negative thing. You got to be obsessed. And Grant Cardone, I don't know if you know Grant Cardone, he talks about this as well. I listened to his audiobook on obsession after I had written my TEDx talk, and he talks about it as well. And I couldn't agree with him anymore.
I'm glad that you were saying about obsession, because we have always, for the longest time, heard that word and associate it with a negative connotation of being obsessed. Don't be obsessed with this. You're too obsessive, all that. But like you said, there's that good, healthy obsession, a passion that drives you. And I love that you talk about resilience too. But I got a couple questions for you before we actually leave.
Sure.
Number one is your favorite car. Number two would be either a favorite travel destination that you've been to or something on a bucket list. And number three, a movie. Favorite movie or one that you're looking forward to. So number one, that car. What is your favorite car?
Okay, well, so I didn't expect this question.
I know.
But I say this, and please, for you and your audience, I'm just going to answer it sincerely, but by no means am I sitting here trying to be arrogant or boasting or anything like that. But in the last decade of my life, I was never a car person. My entire life, as well as my wife's, we've been Lexus people. We've just had Lexus cars, very good cars, right? But about 10 years ago, actually I think to the day, 10 years ago, I jokingly said to my wife, purely as a joke, I said, hey, honey, what do you think we go over to the luxury dealership here in Scottsdale and take a look at a Bentley? And she looked at me and totally shocked me And she looked at me and said, I think we ought to do that. And I said, what? And she said, I think we ought to do that because you have worked so hard your whole life. I see you work, 10, 12-hour days, all week long, and you deserve it. You more than anyone deserve it. And I was like, wow, you've got to be kidding. So 10 years ago we went, and long story short, I purchased a Bentley. Okay, well, fast forward throughout the last 10 years, I've now become somewhat addicted. Now, I know it kind of sounds like I'm going against my instant gratification, but hey, I'm in my 60s, man, so I think I've earned it.
You've earned it.
Right. So now probably my favorite car, which this is now my second of these that I've had, is I have what's called a Rolls-Royce Wraith, which is a two-door coupe from Rolls-Royce. And it is just a stunning vehicle. So you can Google it. For those of you out there who are not familiar, I was not familiar with it at all till I saw it in the showroom, and I instantly fell in love with it. So that's the answer to that question.
Wow.
As far as favorite destination, there are many. And earlier in this segment, you were talking about, treating yourself with some trips, etc. And that's something that, again, in the last 10 years or so, I've also taken up very seriously, not only for myself. I mean, there is some selfishness to it, but also I wanted it for our family and for our kids, because I wanted to introduce our children to different cultures like you were talking about. And so we've been blessed to travel all over the world, and probably, there's so many wonderful destinations. Our most recent, which was about a year ago, is we went on one trip. We did a week to Dubai, and then from there we flew over to the Maldives Islands in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the ocean, which was spectacular. But that's just kind of like an island trip, right? The Maldives, to me, it was beautiful, but it's like any other island in a sense. Dubai was extraordinary, just extraordinary. The other destination that our family absolutely loved was Australia. Australia is just a gorgeous country, different parts of Australia. Climbing the harbour bridge there in Sydney, Australia was amazing. I was scared out of my... I couldn't tell you how scared I was to do it, but once I actually did it, boy, I was so glad that I did. So those are some of my favorite destinations and our family's favorite destinations. And the last question... as far as movies, it's interesting. My wife and I used to go to movies every single Saturday, and I don't know what happened with kids. Life has gotten busy, and we don't really go to movies that much anymore. But I'm still a kid at heart, and I like the dorky movies. And so one of my favorite movies, which is really kind of a series, I think there's 3 of them if I'm not mistaken, is the Austin Powers movies. I don't know if you ever watched those, but like with Mike Myers playing Austin Powers, and the British guy and the ugly teeth, and he gets all the women and defeats evil and all that. So I like goofy movies like that, and I just crack up when I think of Austin Powers.
Yeah. Thanks for answering those 3 questions. And the reason I ask those is just so people are really aware that this is your gratification. You didn't do it immediately. Now you're at that point, like I said, you can afford to do these things, and it brings you that much more pleasure, because instead of getting that Volkswagen Jetta that you dreamed of, you were able to get the Bentley. You delayed. Now you're able to get the Rolls. And as far as travel goes, for me, the reason I ask on the travel is, once again, it affords you to go to places that you can learn from, get experiences, more experiences, and culture, I think, is a very important thing, as far as learning and traveling, at least in my book. And as far as the movie goes, I always thought movies are a great way to escape. And right. You go there for that fantasy, or you go there for whatever it is, but you're escaping your normal surroundings for 2, maybe 3 hours. So, and the other thing, going back to the cars, is because it's a perfect example for me and some of my friends that I have known for many years. they had a dream of getting a particular car. Theirs were muscle cars, 67, 66 fastbacks, and a few other things. It wasn't until their late 50s that they worked hard, and they're at that point now. They said, I've got a couple of houses I own. I've got rental property. It's time for me to celebrate, and I'm going to buy that car. If they did that first, there's probably no way that they could have accumulated. And I don't want people to think accumulation is a bad thing. It can also be a good thing, just
Correct.
like obsession.
Correct.
But they're now at that point in their life where they say, I can start picking and choosing what is it that I really want. What is it that really makes me happy? And they can do that.
Right, and they can share it with family and friends, right? So, I mean, in my case, I'm more of a family guy. I'm kind of a loner otherwise. I don't have a huge circle of friends. But I enjoy, I enjoy it myself, right? I mean, there's a selfish aspect, but really what I truly enjoy is being able to share it with my family and to share it with my wife and share it with my kids. And that means so much to me. And again, I keep going back to this, but I mean it sincerely, that I'm just trying to leave this legacy whereby when I'm gone, they have some memories that they can think back on. And that's what I've tried to create is memories both in our travel and memories in terms of my talks and speeches. And hopefully, hopefully I've been, for the most part, a good role model. I mean, I've not been perfect. I know that. I've been a little hard with the kids at times, but I hope that they fully understand, and as they get older, that my way of teaching was really out of love more than anything else.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm very happy again that you shared everything with us today. And I'm going to say this is evergreen, meaning that this is something that the audience out there, you could watch, listen to over and over and over. These things are not dated. The information that we just received from Dr. Justo, it's going to be there forever. It's going to help you out for the long term. So.
Thank you, and kudos to you for all that you're doing. It's really been a joy, a sincere joy and pleasure talking to you. I mean, I feel I don't know you super well, but I feel like you could be my adopted best friend, because you're just such a nice person to talk to, and I feel that we share a bond there somewhere. So thank you for the opportunity. I really mean that.